Pat, you have created some really successful businesses. So I'm just curious, what does it take to build a successful business?
I grew up around small business. So I was able to watch a grandfather who had a small grocery store in a small town in New Jersey in the United States. And, didn't make a lot of money. It was just, sort of making a living. And he had some other businesses, and my mother and father worked in those businesses from time to time. So I was always around it. What I really saw in that process was what working on the business was all about.
Sometimes it's very difficult to unlearn those habits. Was there something that you had to unlearn later on?
And that is what has worked to get you to where you are. You just can't keep doing the same things through every level of growth, right?
Exactly, yeah.
People talk about many ways. Our greatest strengths can become our greatest weaknesses, right?
What inspired you to write that book, and what would you like to say about your book?
What inspired me was my own journey in growing up around business, okay, and in taking my own journey through my own businesses. So the reason I wrote the book was to say, here's a little bit of my perspective, okay, and my thoughts and frameworks, for what I've learned. Navigating your business, I think there's three things that you'll always focus on or need to. We're always learning that we have to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently.
This episode is brought to you by Corporate Influence Media.
Pat, you have created some really successful businesses. So I'm just curious, what does it take to build a successful business?
Boy, that great question, Ina. I guess, it takes a number of things. I guess if I go back and I look at my history to just give some context, I grew up around small business, right? So I was able to watch a grandfather who had a small grocery store in a small town in New Jersey in the United States. And, didn't make a lot of money. It was just, sort of making a living. And he had some other businesses, and my mother and father worked in those businesses from time to time. So I was always around it. What I really saw in that process was what working on the business was all about.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was watching and I didn't know what I was watching at the time. Right. And, we all talk about working in a business versus what's working on it.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, success is having that great idea, right? What it takes to build a successful business, having that great idea that someone needs, right? And you can differentiate yourself from someone else and you have a passion to deliver it. But ultimately, what builds that sustainable business is what I started observing as a kid and had to work through in all my businesses, which was, how do you scale? How do you build the process and system so that thing you love ultimately doesn't need you as much anymore.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's at the core of building a successful business, right? Somehow you got to figure out how to work on the business so that you can build the process and system to properly scale it and grow it to a sustainable enterprise.
I also have seen people around me, like my family people, they were into business. Sometimes it's very difficult to unlearn those habits. Was there something that you had to unlearn later on?
Great question, Ina. And that is, what has worked to get you to where you are? You just can't keep doing the same things through every level of growth, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And it's one thing to look for that and recognize that. And then it's another thing to, how do you not throw out what's working, but be open to the fact that, what I've been doing isn't necessarily going to get me to that next level. And what kind of personal or transformation do I need to make and changes in my leadership, along with what changes do I have to start applying in my business?
So what do you think? What mistakes people still make and that keeps them stuck?
A great question. One of them we just talked about would be, recognizing that you've got to first transform yourself as a leader and change yourself where you can ultimately change that business, right? The other thing is that, again, depending on what size business you're at, right? If you look at that, whether you're in the startup phase of the business or the growth phase or what I call the maturity phase, there are different things that you have to do to make that business work, right? And in doing that, the changes in yourself have this need for control.
Yeah.
We keep controlling, but yet let go, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we all have this need to be liked at some level. And it's
Need
the
for approval.
right. And it's the emotional mindset side of the obstacle. So whatever obstacle's there, the way I always like to look at it is we have to look in the mirror and we have to redefine where we get our identity from. For instance, at certain stages of my growth, I feel really good about what I accomplished. And that drove what obstacles I saw or how I maybe overcame those obstacles. So I had to recognize, geez, I need to get my identity out of my outcomes and how I'm getting them done through other people.
Yeah.
And not myself. And being the control freak that I am, and I'm a perfectionist, I had to learn how to manage that. Okay. And in that process, because I'm a thinker and like many people are in business, but sometimes you can think too long and you got to ultimately get started and then embrace the pivots. So some of the universal obstacles, I think, they center around those core psychological issues, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. And the obstacles are, you might be a bottleneck, but why are you a bottleneck? Right. Or you're not using the right systems to scale the business.
Yeah.
But why aren't you using them? And everyone tells us about the systems, but they don't always help us see those mindset shifts that we have to make.
Exactly. I totally agree with you on this. It's basically people are talking about more of strategies, people are talking about more of systems, which is definitely important. But then the more important thing is being. Like I say that it's 80% being and 20% doing, because what you are, you would make choices from that place, right? From that place of being. So people, the biggest mistake that I see people making is this, that they don't work on themselves, they work on their businesses really hard, as you said rightly in the beginning. Also, there's need for control, need for approval. I can so much relate with that because I have done that in my business also. It's like more of the numbers game. I get it. It's nice, but then it doesn't have to be taking your sanity away.
Absolutely. And it really can, because, a lot of those things are what got you successful in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And that old thing we always talk about, right? And people talk about many ways. Our greatest strengths can become our greatest weaknesses, right? Because the extremes of those things, right?
Yeah.
So some of those things and how we look at things and how we think, right? And how we feel about things, they got us to where we are.
Yes,
But
yes.
how do we play that inner game and make those adjustments,
Yeah.
in going forward is just so important. And it's really how you have to think differently.
Yeah. So you talk about disciplined thinking. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
That's great topic. I had a mentor that really, I've always been a thinker, if you will, but boy, I didn't know how to think until I had this mentor that came in when I was making the change, from that entrepreneurial driven company to one that had to be more of a blend of entrepreneurism, the term professional management, right? Or management systems, right? And one without the other, you can't really have a sustainable enterprise, right? So boy, he taught me what I call disciplined thinking. And he actually gave me the term, which is, how do you learn how to give time to thought, not paralysis analysis, but maybe not as much ready, fire, aim either, right? How do you find that common ground, right? But in that, I think in today's world of overwhelm, we don't take the time to slow up and think. But when we do, we don't have a lot of time. So the discipline part of it is take the time, okay, to not speed up, but to zoom out and slow down and see what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Because you'll move even faster, right? Once you start to implement it. But in doing that, how do you whittle away all the unimportant, right? And in leadership, our job is to make things simple, right? People we're leading, for the people that we lead. But if we don't give it enough thought and what I call embrace the complexity, okay, to whittle away to make it simple, we end up speaking in activities instead of outcomes. And then when we do that, we hold on to ownership of the how instead of leaving the how up to the people that we're leading. And so I guess the last thing I'll say, what disciplined thinking to me is, it's really hard. Okay. Because to take the time to do it, I always compare it to like digging a ditch.
Mm.
Okay. Picture this, take out this shovel, right? And we all want to we'll take one dig of that hole. Okay. And we'll shovel out the dirt. And then we want to get moving. But the real gold is about, 6 shovels down. All right. And if we really think and dig those next 5 or 6 shovels, we'll identify the outcome that we're trying to accomplish. And then it'll really help us better communicate the outcomes to the people on our teams so that they can do a better job of saying, oh, now I got clarity. I know exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm.
Now they'll get in there and roll up their sleeves and work together on how we do it.
Yeah.
So to me, disciplined thinking is carving away all the unimportant to know where you're trying to go, clarity, and then what helps you put the right path in place to get from point A to point B in the most efficient way.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And also sometimes it's so important to stop thinking, to not let because our minds are untamed. They are just, wild, dysfunctional. And most of the times our minds are using us, we are not using our minds. So when we are thinking so much unimportant stuff, so much, just endless thinking, which is most of the times negative and useless. And then we get in that process of endless thinking, and then that makes us feel stressed and anxious and lots of different negative things in our business, and we make choices from that position. So I like that, like slowness of thinking is so important, right? That you get some time and sit down, just have that time and think only in those times, right? This is working for me very well, because this is what I just adopted. When I started practicing that mindfulness and all that stuff, I realized that I was thinking too much. And most of the times I was thinking just useless and negative stuff, like what happened in the past. And there was no sequence, as you know. So then I started this, that schedule my thinking time when I sit down and think about something. And then the rest of the times, whenever I think of something, I just come back to my breath. I know that I'm not 100% perfect with it, but this is what I practice. And this has worked really well for me. So I understand what you're saying by disciplined thinking.
Yeah. And as you're alluding to, it's like the right level of it is situation dictates that, as well as it's like for somebody like me who overthinks. Okay. I've really had to learn how to manage that.
Yeah.
But why do I overthink, or why does somebody want to move more quickly to implementation? Okay. It's because we're in our own ways, we're trying to get at the uncertainty of action. So do the best you can and then take action.
Yeah.
And then embrace the change, right?
Exactly.
And embrace the pivots.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much we think, whichever end of the spectrum we're on that is, do the right amount of thinking so that you, at least I always say, know what step you need to take at a minimum and what that next step is. Forgetting long-term vision and things of that for a second, right? But in implementing, what are the next few steps?
Yeah.
And if you see them clearly and you have a good vision, just embrace the step and then embrace the pivot, because that will reveal whether you're on the right track or you need to make an adjustment, right? But if we spend too much time thinking or not enough time thinking, we won't see those clues for what the right pivots are.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. So now let's talk about something really, really important, which I think that when we started this conversation, I had this idea that if somebody is listening to us right now, and this person is just starting out in his business and is a startup, just thinking of starting that startup. And so let's help that person today. And for example, somebody has an idea about a business. So from there, what does this person take to get through the process, navigate through to reach that enterprises level where, this person is the owner of a successful enterprise. So let's start from there.
Okay. Big topic, right? But let's between you and I, we'll simplify it as best we can, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think first of all is understanding the context, right? What I always like to do is providing context is you have that idea. The idea moves to startup. Okay. And then ultimately it moves, once you've proven it, there it moves to, sort of what is, okay, now we're going to grow it. Then we move to that stage where we're going to build systems around we grow it. And
Yeah.
that's called the maturity phase, right? And in that process, I think I always talk about there's 5 phases within that life cycle process. A life cycle of a business is idea, startup, growth, maturity, right? And then there's several others, but to keep it simple. So that's sort of the life cycle of a business or even a product within a business. And then there's 5 phases that I like to look at. All right. That you take yourself through those life cycles. And it is that idea. And you're saying, okay, it's a customer. What's the customer fit? Okay. You have customer needs and the fit. Okay. So at that stage, you want to really be, you're on the front lines. You want to make sure that what you have is needed. And because there's a difference between need and demand, you want to make sure it's needed and enough people want it and that you're able to communicate why it's different than anyone else out there. Right. So, that's sort of, you go through that fit stage. And then once you've got that, you start growing. Okay. And now you go through what I call the stretch phase, right? Where you're growing and now your resources become stretched. Time, skills, money, whatever, systems, whatever those things are. Right. And so when you get into that growth stage, it also takes a different, back what we talked about earlier, it takes a different kind of leader in that stage.
Yeah.
But now you're going to go from, okay, somebody wants it. Now, how do I get more people that want it?
Yeah.
And all the activities that go around that, right? Okay. And then we go to the stage where, okay, now scale really comes in. How do we build the systems around that? So, because we can't scale the hustle, now what we've got to do is build the systems around that process, right? And then up to that point, what I always like to say, culture has sort of, your culture, your values has sort of been just built around who you are and how, and the kinds of people that you personally been able to bring into the business. But as you scale, different people are hiring, you're bringing more people into the business. So you have to be more intentional about culture. Right. And the DNA of your culture, because just as you have to change, your culture and your business is going to adjust because there's different people coming in. Right. But you don't want to lose the DNA of that culture. So how do you be intentional about how you hire, bring people on board? And that's really the ultimate way as you get older as a company and grow bigger, that's really the way you control your business, right?
Yeah.
Around your culture. Last but not least, through that whole process, that's sort of sequential, going from customer need to stretch to management systems to culture. There's that, how do you anticipate what's next as you're going through that? And I talk about this in linear form, but it's not necessarily linear. Like you're always anticipating what's next. For instance, I mentioned that last, especially today's world of uncertainty. How do you anticipate what's next? So I think that's what I view as the journey sort of at 10,000 feet, right? You got a life cycle and then you got the phases within those life cycles and recognizing that every one requires a different kind of leadership and requires different things to scale your way through that.
Yeah. And also, people like CEOs and founders I work with, and I see that they want to serve everybody. They don't want to exclude anybody, right? They want to have as big as possible customer base. They would not like to narrow down like what is the kind of customer they would like to serve, right? So this is basically when we say that ICP, like, the customer persona we make and stuff like this. So people want to be everything to everybody. I think this is also something that they need to be really clear on very early, that who is the person that they would like to serve. So I believe that it's about the kind of person I am, the kind of person I will attract. So that is going to be my customer. So your customer is just exactly like you, more or less the same,
Absolutely. As you grow, and this, Hina, it's just as important what to say no to as it is to say yes, right?
Yeah.
And, we all look at things and we say the customer is I always also add to that. And I say that customer is always right. And I said, but that's not true. That's not the
Yeah,
first
that's
thing.
not true.
The first thing is you choose the customer, right?
Yes, yes.
And then once you choose the customer, then the customer's always right. That's how, at least how I look at it. And so much comes from really identifying who is that sweet spot for who your customer is, because
Yeah.
it impacts everything throughout your company. And know to say no to is so very important.
I love that you said that. There are so many shiny things in the world today, that lots of messages that we keep getting on LinkedIn. Like, for example, I'm getting many messages like they want me to be a co-founder in their company. And I was like, oh my God, this is something. And one of my friends, he said, why don't you, explore that opportunity? I said, there's so many opportunities. What would you, how far can you go with every opportunity to think it through? And this is just waste of energy and time. So there's something you call like a 3C process, which is about making decisions. So would you like to walk us through that?
Yes, absolutely. I think what we're referring to is my 3Cs process.
Yes.
And I look at that as that process helps me with tackling any challenge, whether it be a problem or an opportunity. And I learned it over the years, right, of saying, how today we're all focused on frameworks, right, and checklists. Those are very important. But what's so much more important is the thinking that goes within them, right? I can fill out a template,
Yeah.
but it's the thinking that goes within. So my 3Cs process is a template, but what it does is it guides you through thinking, which is more important than the simple process, if that makes sense. And 3Cs stand for clarify, chart, and co-align. Clarify meaning in any challenge, opportunity, or problem, clarify what that challenge is. Okay, make sure you're focused on the right thing. If it's a problem, is it the root cause, or are we chasing symptoms? If it's an opportunity, is it one that we want to go after, or is it one we want to say no to, right?
Yeah.
And then in that, it's so easy to say, we're going to go attack this stuff. But you know what? In a vacuum, it's easy to say, well, let's do this. But there's so many competing priorities that what can we get done? So that clarification process in any challenge is so important. And then you go to, once you got that clarified, you go to chart your course. And chart the course doesn't necessarily mean a detailed implementation plan. That comes. The chart the course is, what are your outcomes that we're looking for if we tackle this challenge? And what are the non-negotiables? And what I mean by non-negotiables are what must happen and what cannot happen. And what I mean by that is look at it like you're on a 12-lane highway, okay? And what are your guardrails? What are your bumpers? Look at your non-negotiables, what must happen and what can't happen as your bumpers, your guardrails. Because as you bring other people into the process, okay, and think about aligning them, which is the third C, all right, it's so much easier when we've talked to them about, okay, let's talk about outcomes. Are we all aligned? And now let's talk about what must happen and what can't happen. And maybe they might think about things that we're not, our team. But what's most important is we give them those wide guardrails. And now we can really step back and say, okay, now, how do we do this? How do you think we should go about doing this? And then they can really take ownership of the how, right? Okay. And so the power, in my view, of the 3Cs for extracting and whittling away the unimportant, extracting information. It's like a whittler, a whittler has this big block of wood. Yeah. And then you start carving away the unwanted, right? Okay. And, you have a vision, which is clarify your challenge. Okay. And chart your courses. You start whittling away the wood. Yeah. Okay. And you have a numbers of people that can help you do that. Yeah. Okay. And then when you're done, everyone's aligned on, okay, this is what that vision looks like. We've got this beautiful carving, and now we're ready to go bring it to life and climb that mountain together. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Like when what is clear, then how is easier. So it's all about vision. Like if you have the vision right, if you have a big vision for your 3 years, for the next 5 years, then you know that every choice that you are making, it is being filtered through that vision. I'm building this particular kind of business. Then I know that which choice is the best one to get me there. So this becomes so much easier when we do that.
Yeah. And the old story is, if you've started for something, you can change from something, right? If you don't have clarity before you get started, right? It's so challenging. I had someone that was, at the time, this was years ago, he said to me, it was the president of Porsche cars in the United States. And I'll make this quick and short, but he drew on a board. He drew on a board and he said, why is it? He said, look at these two approaches to tackling any kind of a challenge. He said, you have your outcome, you have where you're trying to go, you have implementation, and you have results.
Yeah.
And he said, why is it that starting point? If you were looking at a whiteboard right now, right? And you had one starting point and another starting point, and the arrow for implementation, one was longer than the other.
Hmm.
Then it hit results. Okay. Well, if the starting and planning side of it was longer and the implementation side was short, and we got to results faster, we would all choose that, right?
Yeah.
But he says, why is it that everyone chooses that short arrow that says the planning, and we end up in that long implementation, and the results are later if we ever get there? Why is that? Right?
Yeah.
And so I tried to design the 3 C's thinking around, okay, put a little bit of time in clarifying and thinking things through, and then your implementation will be less chaotic and shorter to get to your results. And you know what? You're going to find change, so you'll be able to embrace the pivots a lot better because you've got more clarity along the way.
Yeah, clarity is everything. So as you were talking about the person like we would like to help through this conversation who's listening to us right now and starting something with the intention to make it really big, is the idea that you be very clear about it, right? You start with a vision that you would like to create, and just don't leave everything on chance that, okay, let's see how things work, how things go. So start with that vision that you would like. What would you like to build in the next 5 years or 7 years or 3 years? And just start from there with the right kind of identity in mind. Yes, it's just that you start with the vision first. As you said that, the longer it's the planning and stuff, that part, the faster it is to get there. So when we start with the vision, when we know that this is the vision that we are going to, then everything becomes so much easier.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and then how do you take that vision into planning, right? I think that's what you're asking, right? So in doing that, Hina, what I always talk about, and I think every situation you get there differently, right? You take the science of something and then you have to adapt it to be successful in another situation, right? What's happening? What are the trends going on that are impacting my customer and my company? What happens if I don't do anything about them? What happens if I do something? And if I take action, when do I take action? Those are the kinds of things that if you start moving into a framework that starts taking that vision and putting it into an assumption planning framework, you naturally plan activities, budgets, and objectives.
Absolutely.
But you have such a bigger view of could impact your company. And in a world of uncertainty, nobody's got a crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
It helps you plan a lot better for the uncertainty when you plan around assumptions you need to make. And if you're going to make a change the assumption. Discuss why you want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a lot easier to get alignment when we're all comparing apples and apples about, let's talk about the assumption on why we want to do that instead of arguing over that we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Make sense? So I think vision into a way to look at how to plan.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a big piece. And then
That's a big piece. Yes.
You got to have your execution systems so that you can implement, because you just can't do it because by micromanaging or by working harder, you've got to have efficient systems to implement against that plan.
Yeah, that's so true. And I would also like to add here that sometimes we are so much controlling stuff that things are not happening because we are not giving them space to blossom. So we're just, holding them so tightly that, okay, I want to control this to be like this. So sometimes it's like, I would say that we just need to leave that alone and do the work and just let it breathe. Recently, like I was talking about this, that it's about parenting your business, right? So the better the parent you are to your business, the better the business is going to be. So I was just, thinking like that when I was a child and my mom was just, controlling me. So how did I feel about that? So if I see that the business is a person and I'm a parent and my business is a child as a person, and then what exactly should I do so that this child of mine can breathe and I can trust that, you can do that independent support where I need to, but then don't try to suffocate it by micromanaging, by overthinking, by worrying, and by doing a lot of different things that we often do in our business. And I have done that too before I actually started to, trust it and be spiritual and let things be and do at their own pace.
Just in light of everything you're saying, it's a great analogy, one, and I relate it myself. It's like, it's like what gets me stuck a lot is, okay, I'm going to think my way through this, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just create that space and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm unstuck because now I almost automatically zoom out, right? And
Right.
you can get perspective, right, in that process. So really powerful what you're saying, Hina.
Thank you.
And I always also relate to something you said with that journey of being a parent. I think so many people can relate to that if they do
Yeah.
have kids. Because in growing a business, we talked earlier about that startup, that growth phase, then that maturity. And it's just like raising kids, right?
Yeah.
You think of that growth phase as like the adolescent phase of raising kids. You got all these growing pains. Which ones do you just leave alone because they got to grow through them? And which ones do you have to, okay, I got to step in here. And you're right. If you can look in the mirror and if you have that experience, and if you don't have kids, remember what it was like growing up for yourself, right?
Exactly. Right.
And you can right away say, okay, maybe here's how I need to react to this.
Yeah.
Because it is, and the last thing I'll say is, I always say to people, always be thinking about how you want to sell your business when you start it, right?
Hmm.
And not that you're going to lose your passion. You may never sell it, but you don't always want it dependent on yourself because you build real value when ultimately it doesn't need you. As you said, looking at ourselves as parents or looking at
Yeah.
ourselves in growing up, it's like
Yeah.
greatest job we have as parents is to let them go. I love my kids.
Yeah. I love that.
I thank God my adult kids want to spend time with me because I'm so grateful, right? But it's like, hey, if they were dependent on me, I didn't do my job, right? Just like a business, I'm still involved with my kids. It's a different relationship, just like a business and an enterprise. My job was to make it ready to work, make them ready to go on to life without me.
Yeah.
And that's what our job is in leading a business.
Yeah, exactly. So there is that need for control comes in, that we want to control every aspect of it. We want to control how my social media looks. I want to control how my posts do, right? How many reactions or something engagements getting, or how my customers or clients are behaving, or, do they really need me and stuff like that. It's basically just let everything go and be very secure about yourself in your positioning. And this is all spiritual process, I believe. It's like the more trust you can give to your business, the more your business will grow.
Well, Hina, and what resonates with me is, I would add, obviously not change anything you're saying. I agree wholeheartedly, is I watch not just entrepreneurs do this, but leaders at different levels as they're going through their career. Okay. And that is back to, we alluded to this earlier. We take something and we all tend to go to one extreme or the other, right?
Mm.
And in letting go, I think that's really important. And what I see happen often is we let go or someone lets go and the right systems aren't in place because we still need control. Every business still needs its controls, but we have to control differently, right? We used to control by touching everything.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we control through the value system or by the information that we get. We could talk for hours between you and I, right, about what some of the systems are.
Yeah.
But in that process, I think what happens is the entrepreneurs I speak to, but any leader, it's like they know they have to let go. So they let go and it's almost like they disengage. And there's a difference between letting go and disengaging, right? And I know you know that, and then we say, okay, now how do we bring you back a little bit? Because you do need to let go.
Yeah.
but you don't need to disengage, right?
Exactly. You don't need to abandon.
Right. So it's an interesting process. And I remember I went through that myself. Being the real control freak I was when I
Yeah.
woke up one day and saying, man, I got to let go. I didn't let go in the right way. So there's an art to that also for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. This is beautiful. And I love what you just said. Obstacles to opportunities. What inspired you to write that book? And what would you like to say about your book?
Oh, geez. Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity. I guess what inspired me was my own journey. We have talked a little bit about this early, right? In growing up around business, okay, and in taking my own journey through my own businesses, and then ultimately having that aha moment that says, get as much, if not more, enjoyment out of helping others grow theirs versus me continuing to grow mine. But in that journey, I couldn't name it early on, and it started very early for me. But then I started naming it, and I saw the people that came into my life. Either I looked for them or they just happened to be there. And I had to open my eyes to the fact that they were there. They were where I was trying to go, or they'd been where I was trying to go, right? So in that process, it kept me away from so many landmines because we all learn the most from our mistakes. And trust me, I still made a lot of mistakes, right?
Yeah, we all do.
We'd all do, right? But yet I would have made so many more if it weren't for all these people that along my journey.
Yeah.
So in that, I wanted to write the book in the same way. So the reason I wrote the book was to say, here's a little bit of my perspective, okay, and my thoughts and frameworks, for what I've learned, a little bit. We talked earlier about the 3 C's, okay? But at the same time, the middle part of my book is there's about, 20 some people, okay? Either I worked with, many I didn't. They'd allow me to interview them or their friends or people I knew. And we talked about all their challenges and how they tackled them. So the book is a way to go out to other leaders and saying, if you want one place to get some tips, some ideas, this is it. And I'm really excited because some of the people that are giving me feedback say they take a highlighter and they highlight things because there's so many ideas in there. And it's not about me. This is about, there's some of them are mine, but many of them are others. And even some of them are mine. I've learned from others, right? So in that, it's big picture stuff, but it's also actionable knowledge. How do you walk away from and take that tip and put it into action today? Yeah. So I'm proud of that. And I'm thankful for all the people that were part of the book. And I think it's a great resource to keep you away from your landmines in growing your business because there's navigating your business. I think there's 3 things that you'll always focus on or need to. We're always learning that we have to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently. And how do we do that at every phase of growth? Personally, and then for the people that we lead. And this is just, hopefully people will find it as one resource that will help them do that.
Yeah, this is amazing. And as we were just talking about it, I was telling you that I was browsing through your book and it had amazing reviews, and I decided that, okay, tomorrow I'm going to buy this book and start reading it. So I would definitely recommend that go ahead and read that book, buy that book. It's available in Kindle and paperback form, right? Or audio too? Is that available?
Well, not audio yet. My plan is to try to get that done by the end of the year. But right now it's hardback, paperback, and Kindle. But I hope to get the audio done by the end of the year or first quarter of next.
Okay. So which one chapter you feel the business leaders should read twice from your book?
There's so many that come to mind.
Yeah.
And I don't want to feel like that. And I say that not to be a commercial. There's so many stories of people. There's a chapter on collaboration. Okay. And to me, that's such a powerful word because as we try to scale our businesses, okay, no matter what we're trying to do, there's always a gap in bandwidth, knowledge, or skills.
Yeah.
Okay. And we can't do it alone. Back to what we've been talking about, right?
Yes.
And I think there's a way to collaborate successfully.
Yeah.
Because I've done it so often and I've done it where it hasn't worked and I've watched what does and I've learned some of the things on how to make it successful, right? And there's a way to do that. So in the book, I talk about a process for collaboration. And I think it's just so important because even if we have all the knowledge and the skills between ourselves and our team, in today's world of overwhelm, we don't have the bandwidth. We can't do it alone.
Yeah.
So I think collaboration is so important. The last thing I'll say on it, because I can get wordy on this, I'm passionate about this topic, is that in collaboration, it puts you at a table with smart people, maybe smarter. And my definition of smart is not IQ. Okay. It's people that have different experiences than we do. And if you're a lifelong learner, and you better be if you want to lead a company today or lead with it, right? You better be. And that's what excites me, because we're all energized by impact, and being able to sit at a table with one or other people that have different experiences and opinions than I do. I love it. And if you don't love that, you don't belong in leadership. And forgive me, I mean no disrespect to your listeners, but they need, in my opinion, they need to find another path, because that's what will really keep your own learning up and keep your energy up and keep the value that you have to serve others, because you're going to constantly learn, and it's so energizing.
Yeah, it's so energizing. And we don't have to do everything alone, because this is something that we have always taught by the society, that it's good to be independent. It's good to do it all by yourself. And, we feel that hesitation to reach out for help and support and collaboration, of course, it works the same way. So it's always good to work with people and not do everything alone, which solves a lot of problems, I guess, for us.
Absolutely. And it gets back to, you were saying some of your listeners are going to be a startup, right? Again, there's so many things that you or I could tell them, right? But ultimately, it takes that doer when you start it, but it's less of a doer, if you will, and the definition that we're using for, it's like you need others, and we all need to figure out how we can bring them in with us, as well as learn as much from them as we're trying to teach them, and we can't do it without knowing how to collaborate effectively.
Yeah, I want to talk about this a bit here before we wrap up. It's like, I remember that a few years ago, I was just very much, struggling in my business, and I was seeing that, okay, I want to make this money and all that stuff. And then I was talking to a coach once, and we just set up a meeting, and I said, this year I would like to make $100,000, which was of course less, but then that was my target at that time. And my coach said that, why $100,000? You can make much more. And from that position, everything changed for me. And I say that in just 2.4 years, I maxed my income much more than, like, now. There's no comparison with what I started and what I do now. But then just in 2.4 years after that, I 10xed my income. So it was again a couple years ago. So I would like to say that a coach always shortens your success journey. So it's always good to have that support. And even now, like, whenever I have a big target, I would go hire a coach, and I would say that, help me achieve this number.
Yeah.
So this is always a smart way a shortcut to get your goals faster.
Yeah. I always say to people ask me a lot, what's one of the things you might say to, younger people getting into business, and I even say it's even for us seasoned or older people. And that everybody uses that seasoned term instead of older anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I have to, because I've become seasoned. But in that process, always start out with, I don't know what I don't know.
Yes, I
that learning, because that makes you curious.
Yeah.
And never lose that. And then because of that, there are coaches that you can hire. There are people that were willing to mentor you. There's so many ways to make that line straighter from A to B faster, to stay away from those landmines. We just have to, I think, look in the mirror and say, even if I've done this 20 times, I don't know what I don't know right now.
Yeah.
So if I haven't done this, can I get somebody to help me? Now, not delay maybe taking action sometimes, but if you start from there, it gets us away from that we think we know it all kind of thing, or I've been there, done that. Because I don't, right? I'll stop there because I could continue to talk on that. I'm right with you, Hina. You and I are very much philosophically aligned.
Yeah, I could feel that. This conversation was like that. So what is the best and easiest way to get your book, Pat?
I guess that the easiest way is it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on all the online retailers. It's just Obstacles to Opportunity, and or you can go to my website and you can get even more information there at patalacqua.com, PATALACQUA.com. But, you can go right to Amazon, or you can get more information and then from my website and then go from there.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time today. I really, really loved it.
Thanks, Ina. I appreciate the invite and I appreciate the conversation.